While on the way home, a young Jeffrey Dahmer sits alone on the school bus. He sees a man jogging on the side of the road and becomes so interested in him that he gets up to get a closer look. Dahmer's fascination for the jogger grows as he continues watching him, even after getting off the bus. Later, Dahmer encounters two boys while walking on the street. They ask him about the plastic bag that he's carrying. Dahmer opens the bag, showing it contains a roadkill cat, and explains he plans to dissolve it in the acid he got from his chemist father. The two boys follow Dahmer to a shed out of curiosity. They watch him process the cat and listen to him explain that it will take a month for the acid to work because it is the weak kind. One of the boys asks why he's doing all this. Dahmer answers it is because he loves bones and is curious about what's inside the animal's body. Skeptical, the two boys tell Dahmer he's lying about using acid and only pouring water in the jar. Dahmer tries to show an older roadkill that he dissolved a while back to the boys, but they still won't believe him. To prove them wrong, he goes outside and breaks the jar open. The two boys find the foul stench repulsive and get weirded out by Dahmer's behavior. They then leave after calling him a freak. Later at dinner, Dahmer asks his father if he can have a different acid, something that works faster. His father says he'll think about it. Dahmer then tries grabbing a chicken leg, but his mother stops him, firmly demanding that it belongs to his little brother. Dahmer tries to complain, but since even his father is telling him to obey, he frustratedly surrenders the drumstick to his brother. While talking about school activities, Dahmer's father tells him to join some school clubs. It seems he wants him to be more social, saying that friends will be their connection to the world. Then, his little brother complains about the chicken being rare, and the father confirms it. The dinner continues on a foul note after the mother rants about nobody appreciating her cooking. At school, Dahmer gets bullied by almost everyone because of his weird behavior. While in biology class, Dahmer gets interested in a jar containing a preserved animal. At lunch, a boy acts kindly towards Dahmer and asks if he wants to see a concert together. After school, Dahmer immediately goes to his shed and creepily unwraps the preserved animal he stole from biology class. He then proceeds to examine it with a content look on his face. Inside the house later, Dahmer's parents are arguing. His mother wants to return to work, but his father doesn't want her to. He believes she isn't ready to do that because it hasn't even been a year since she got released from the mental hospital. Dahmer's brother asks if their parents hate them. He tells him no, and that they're only arguing. Unwilling to expose his brother to the argument, Dahmer gently guides his brother away from his parents. One day, after school band practice, Dahmer sees the boy that invited him to a concert getting bullied. He only watches and eventually walks away, despite the boy trying to get his help. When his dad gets home later that afternoon, he gets frustrated at Dahmer because he's in his shed instead of going out and making friends. Infuriated, he storms into the shed, scolds him, and starts dumping all of Dahmer's preserved animals in the trash can. He then says that he'll be taking down Dahmer's shed. Sometime after his father's intervention, Dahmer returns from school and finds his shed destroyed. He then takes what remains of his bone collection and sits by the side of the road, deep in thought. Then, the male jogger passes by and catches his attention once again. Later in his room, Dahmer's dad apologizes for his outburst and explains why he did what he did. It turns out that he doesn't want his son to be like him, someone that is too focused on work to have friends and socialize. To make up for it, he gives Dahmer a pair of dumbbells as a gift. He's hoping his son may get interested in working out and maybe even manage to snatch a girl in the future. Dahmer works out to satisfy his father's wishes. However, he secretly continues trapping critters out in the woods and collecting their bones. One day while in class, the teacher asks Dahmer a question. Since he's too lazy to answer, he speaks in a silly voice, and the entire class surprisingly finds it funny. Realizing it's an opportunity for him to make friends, Dahmer continues making weird noises and pretending to have a seizure while in the hallway later. It works, and everyone laughs until the bell rings, at which point everyone leaves him alone to return to their classes. Eventually, Dahmer becomes known in school for his fake seizures. One day, his classmates, Derf, Mike, and Neil, asks Dahmer to sit with them for lunch. He reveals that he's only imitating the interior decorator of his mother, who has a disorder. The boys surprisingly get along well and get inspired to form the Dahmer fan club. They believe it could lead to epic pranks, which will liven up what little time they have during their senior year. To start things off, the boys let Dahmer make silly noises in the library. Once the librarian comes out asking who made the noise, the boys pin it on someone else. After that, they all go to the hallway and pretend to be having seizures together. From that point, Dahmer's social life starts improving for the better. Then one day, he discovers that his mother, a former drug addict, is having a relapse. He does his best to make her stop and visit the doctor, but he fails because she's too hard-headed. While fishing with his friends a few days later, something weird happens to Dahmer. After catching a fish, his friends ask him to let it go. Instead of doing that, Dahmer violently guts the fish, claiming he's curious about what the fish's insides look like. While his friends find his behavior disturbing, it doesn't raise any red flags for them. When they return to school that week, Neil talks about taking photographs for the school's yearbook. Dahmer comes up with an idea to put himself in every school club's photo that year. later. His friends think the idea is genius and they successfully pull the prank off. Dahmer brings Derf to his home and excitedly tells his father that he's joined plenty of clubs that year. Unfortunately, it goes right past him because he's too busy arguing with his mom. Eventually, Derf excuses himself and goes home after the atmosphere in the room turns awkward because of all the arguing. Later that day, Dahmer hides behind the trees, waiting for the male jogger to pass by the road. It turns out that he's secretly been doing this ever since he developed a crush on the man. Then, while hanging out with his friends, the jogger arrives and Mike greets him. His name is Dr. Matthews, and it seems he is Mike's family doctor. Dahmer gets flustered, but his friends don't seem to notice it throughout that time. Dahmer arrives home and finds his parents arguing again. This time, it's about his mother impulsively buying a new car. Dahmer joins his dad, who is calming himself down with alcohol by the balcony. Dahmer ends up stealing the bottle, marking the start of his alcohol problems. The next day at school, Fig casually walks up to Dahmer and his friends. He then shows off a pocket knife his supposed ex-Nazi father gave him. Fig then cuts himself with it and sucks his blood. While the three boys find the act repulsive, Dahmer isn't bothered by it. Later that afternoon, Dahmer brings Fig to the forest to hunt some animals. Fig pulls out a gun and tries enticing Dahmer to play Russian roulette with it. Dahmer declines and leaves after saying he doesn't want guns. As time passes, Dahmer's alcohol problems start worsening. He now goes to school while reeking of alcohol, causing Derf to get concerned. Apart from that, he also continues collecting roadkills and dissecting them. When the boys go to Washington, D.C. for an overnight school trip, Dahmer gets roomed with the only black person in his class, Charlie. Dahmer checks him out discreetly at first, but his curiosity eventually gets the better of him. He asks Charlie a disturbing question, and that's if a black person's internal organs are the same color as that of a white person. While Charlie gets weirded out by this, he decides to ignore Dahmer, probably because he's already used to racist questions. While walking down the streets of DC the next day, the boys jokingly discuss getting an interview with the vice president for the school paper. Dahmer takes this seriously and surprises everyone by calling the White House and successfully setting up the interview. They arrive at the White House, and when they have their audience with the vice president, he asks the kids shallow questions about the careers they want to pursue growing up. Dahmer simply answers him, biology. Derf shows Dahmer he's impressed with what he did that day before parting ways. Dahmer is happy, but it doesn't last long. When he gets into the car, his father tells him that he and his mother are thinking about divorce. On top of that, his father decided to leave the house and temporarily live in a motel. Dahmer gets crushed by the news, and he lies in bed that night, struggling to sleep. To make matters worse, his feelings toward Dr. Matthews are growing, and they are starting to bother him. So, he decides to get an appointment with him by faking a cold. Dr. Matthews finds nothing wrong with Dahmer. To be sure, he asks Dahmer to take off his underpants so he can perform a hernia exam. The doctor gets uncomfortable after he notices that Dahmer gets a hard-on during the examination. Things start getting awkward in Dahmer's life as he becomes more aware of his sexuality. He even finds himself in uncomfortable silence as his friends talk about the girls they like. As a result, he starts distancing himself from them and even begins drinking in school. The day when the school yearbook photos get printed finally arrives, the boys are excited. They celebrate after seeing they all have Dahmer in them. Sadly, a teacher walks in on them, and after realizing what they've done, she ruins their plans by blotting out Dahmer's face on the photos. While that happens, Dahmer is troubled because of his parents' impeding divorce and his sexual awakening. During their visit to the motel where their father is staying, Dahmer gets disturbed after seeing his parents fight in the parking lot for their children's custody. Overwhelmed by everything that's going on in his life, he locks himself in his room when they get home. He then lays in bed while imagining that he's cuddling the dead body of Dr. Matthews. Elsewhere, Dahmer's friends are at a party and get confronted by one of their classmates about not hanging out with Dahmer anymore. Challenged, Derf issues a bet that he could make Dahmer do fake seizures at the mall during the weekend. Neil doesn't like the idea because he feels treating Dahmer as a freak show is inappropriate. However, Derf ignores him and later successfully manages to make Dahmer say yes to his plans by bribing him with money. The weekend arrives, and Dahmer is in the back seat of Derf's car, rapidly chugging down beer on their way to the mall. Once there, Derf introduces Dahmer to their school friends. He quickly corrects Derf and says that this time around, he'd like to be known as Jeffrey. After that, Dahmer proceeds to perform his seizures. He publicly humiliates himself for the sake of entertaining his schoolmates. One of them is even recording Dahmer. Eventually, Dahmer gets tired and rejoins his friends. At this point, he realizes that he's nothing more than a sideshow for them. As if that's not enough already, Dahmer arrives home and learns that his parents have finalized their divorce. While his mom gets custody of his little brother, their dad will get the house. Dahmer's mental instability is starting to spiral out of control. He arms himself with a bat the next day and waits for Dr. Matthews to pass by his usual hiding spot. When he doesn't show up, Dahmer gets frustrated and lashes out at a nearby tree until his bat breaks. In the afternoon, kids discover a disemboweled animal in the woods, and it becomes the talk of the school the next day. People, including Dahmer's friends, find it creepy that someone is willing to do that to an animal. Dahmer's friends then start talking about prom. Mike mocks Dahmer Dahmer and says no girl in town would want to be his prom date. Offended, Dahmer makes it his goal to find a date. He decides to ask a freshman named Bridget. She declines him at first but eventually gives in after Dahmer tells her that she'll look cooler in school by going to prom with a senior. So even if they look like an awkward couple on prom night, Dahmer manages to prove Mike wrong and surprise his friends. Sometime later, Neil apologizes to Dahmer for what happened at the mall, even if he wasn't there, and Dahmer accepts his apology. Dahmer then dances with Bridget. He starts feeling uncomfortable because he doesn't like girls. He excuses himself, saying he needs to go to the bathroom. However, he leaves the prom and retreats to be alone in his car, eating burgers and fries in peace. When Dahmer arrives home from school the next day, he sees his mother preparing to leave. She plans to leave with their relatives, and she's also taking his brother with her. Dahmer receives another huge emotional blow now that his mother and brother won't be present during his graduation. He manages to bottle up his feelings until they leave, and during that time, he breaks down in tears inside the house. Dahmer receives his father's car as a gift on his graduation day, but he doesn't seem excited at all about it. Derf later finds Dahmer walking by the road alone, so he gives him a ride home. Once there, Derf notices blood on his friend's fingers, but Dahmer says it's just paint. The two boys then have an awkward talk about their friendship. It seems Derf has no plans of apologizing for treating Dahmer as a circus act. Dahmer invites him for a beer inside the house, and for old time's sake, Derf accepts. However, Derf immediately gets creeped out once they're inside the house, especially with how close Dahmer stands beside him. He then rushes to leave, saying his mom is waiting for him. While Derf walks to his car, Dahmer carries a baseball bat, preparing to strike him. He changes his mind and lets Derf go. Once he's alone, Dahmer starts freaking out after thinking about what he wanted to do earlier. The next day, Dahmer goes for a drive. He spots a hitchhiker and decides to stop and pick him up. The guy's name is Steve Hicks, and he is looking for a ride after attending a concert. Steve takes Dahmer's invitation to continue partying and hops into the car. Little does he know that he will soon be his first victim. The movie ends after some closing notes saying Steve Hicks went to Dahmer's house on June 18, 1978. He was never seen again. It also says that Jeffrey Dahmer got arrested in 1991 and confessed to taking the lives of 17 young men.
Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like. It really helps the channel.